I'd like to invite Shubhrangshu Roy and Nandita Bose on stage. It's a discussion on the book Shadows of the Fragmented Moon. And no, it's not about moonlighting. So those of you who are billing your customers here, we have cameras all around. So the session on the floor right here for you.
Hi. Good afternoon, everybody. I hope you are not too hungry to listen to us. But you know what the tragedy is? The moment we stop talking about Twitter, everybody who is at a Lit Fest leaves. And yeah, we are going to have a boring session because we are going to discuss poetry. It's been a lifelong ambition almost for me to be given a chance to interview a poet. And I'm really, really happy that the first poet I interview on stage is this gentleman, Shubhrangshu Roy, who is now fast becoming a friend because we, chat so often about the events that we have. This is Shubhrangshu's book, and I hope you would give 25 to 30 minutes of your time to, sort of know more about it, and hopefully at the end of the session, buy his book and one of mine. Thank you.
Thank you, Nandita. For those who don't know Nandita, she herself is a established poet, and she's been writing poetry far longer than me. Thank you for being here and agreeing to interview me.
Okay, mutual admiration done for the moment. Now let me get to brass tacks. Shubhrangshu, why have you chosen a couple of medieval texts actually, to base your poems off? Because, typically poets, we are all very, I won't say self-centered, but definitely egoistic, We just want to write about our feelings, our world, our experiences, our descriptions. But he's chosen to read certain, I think they're quite arcane Sanskrit texts, which I didn't know of before, and then wrote of them. So.
Okay. The reason I got into it is this is an area that nobody has really touched. This is my second book called Shadows of the Fragmented Moon. It's a collection of 108 poems in English, with an additional poem at the start, which is a disclaimer to what I go on to write subsequently. My first book is called Zara's Witness. It's a philosophical fantasy. Both the books are based on Upanishadic wisdom, but they are not translations of Upanishadic wisdom. When we touch this book today, let me try and get rid of a misconception that is there about Hindu religion or Vedic religion that we say. It is not really, what you get to see is all rituals and religious festivities. But the books that the ancient rishis wrote, they were really not writing mumbo jumbo. Practically every ancient Indian text is a work of poetry, which is not known. So these were poets sitting on the edge of the forest, expressing themselves to the world on the beauty of nature, on the beauty of the universe, on the intricacies of the universe. And they were interpreting them on how to apply to your mind. Now we are actually meeting here on a very interesting day. For those of you who don't know, it's called the Moksha Ekadashi. Moksha Ekadashi is a day when Krishna gave his sermon to Arjun, that is the Bhagavad Gita, at Kurukshetra before the start of the war. Now, almost all of us have read about the Mahabharata war, and we have read that it was a huge battle between thousands of men riding chariots. And Kurukshetra is the place where it happened. But for many of us, we don't know that Kurukshetra has been identified much before Mahabharata. And where is Kurukshetra really located? Kurukshetra is the place over here between your brows. It's the meeting point of the left lobe and the right lobe of the brain. What Krishna says to Arjuna in Mahabharata is a wonderful text on mind control. And that is where we come in, that most of Indian literature, ancient Indian literature, with which we have come to identify various rituals, They are all entirely about mind control and how to discipline your mind. They're as relevant today as they were 5,000 years ago. And this is what I'm attempting from my books with my two books. Please go and take a look at them, buy them, and you'll understand it's a very important tool on controlling your mind, your emotions, on how to face the world. Um, I chose to write poetry. I'm not a poet by habit or by profession. Uh, the ideas that I was discussing lend themselves best to poetry, and that is why this is the one of book that I've attempted by writing the entire philosophy, entire thought, the essence of how do we really live our life. It's when we talk about shadows of the moon has often been identified with the human mind, and we talk about the waxing and waning of the moon, which comes with the waxing and waning of the mind. So the book is less on moon; it's more on the mind. You can explore it.
I just mentioned that the poems in this book are based on two lesser known but very important texts. So could you tell us a little more about the texts?
Okay, these are basically conversations based on two ancient books, which are still read, and they were earlier read in the ancient times by the kings who went to fight wars. Many of you would perhaps know that these books, one is called Ashtavakra Gita, which is a conversation between a young 12-year or 13-year-old sage and the father of Sita called Janaka. Janaka in Indian history and mythology is the wisest king who ever lived. And this young kid goes to Janaka and tells him how to rule and how to rule wisely. It's a very important text, part of the Mahabharata narrative, part of the Ramayana narrative. The second one is called the Yoga Vashishta Gita. Yoga Vashishta Gita is between a conversation between an aged rishi, Vashishta, and a young teenager, Rama. It's exactly the opposite of Ashtavakra. And the conversation is there to help Rama discipline his mind and go out and become a king and wage a war, which he eventually does, and win it. But if you go deeper into both the texts, the thing is not about the physical war in the battlefield. It's the war that's constantly happening in your mind between the right lobe and the left lobe, and the meeting point is Kurukshetra. We are post-pandemic, and in the modern world, I think something that's been coming to surface very recently but is not widely talked about is the bipolar disorder that most families we have somebody or the other suffering. It is a question of how psychologically and psychiatrically traumatized we are. It's manifested very deeply in these two years of isolation and quarantine, when many people lost their jobs. Many people lost their near and dear ones in very extreme circumstances. And I have a teenage daughter who's preparing to go to school. When they were, for 2 years, they were doing Zoom lessons. While the camera was on, nobody was showing their face to the teachers or to their classmates. And I asked her, why do you do it? If you're doing on Zoom, you should show your face, your friends should show their face, you should be speaking. And I never knew this. It came out that they were all shy of showing their faces. Because and they were very good students, all of them were constantly thinking that they don't really look good in the face. And by wearing masks, after the pandemic was over, they were refusing to remove their mask because everyone was thinking that there's something wrong with their face and they need to constantly cover it up. So this is the kind of the world that we are living in. And I think it would be wonderful if you were to look at these poems, and we'll go through some of those poems perhaps to navigate.
You read one now?
Yeah.
Just to give you a flavor of what is in the text.
So I will first read a very short poem at the start of the book. In a world where we are constantly bombarded that we are not good enough as individuals, as people, as communities, as nations, This is the book where, this is the poem that where we start. What are we? We need to question ourselves, who are we and what are we? And I believe that we are a conglomeration of our senses, and we are constantly responding to our senses in defining who we are. So, my poem at the start, it's a poem called We Are Beautiful. That's who we are. We are the breath we take, the heat that rises from that breath, the light that shines in that heat, the water that reflects that light, the creature that emerges from that water, the odor that emanates from that creature, the touch that defines that odor. We are beautiful. That's all that we are. When we talk about the mind and this constant warfare in the mind, again, the book is divided into 12 chapters. It's about the senses. It starts with who I am. It goes to the senses, the mind, and the forest before we culminate in death. But I'll tell you what this mind is all about that we talk about when we talk about so much of mental trauma. This mind, layer upon layer, this mind of yours creates choices rich of imagination. Mind is the one that's creating all the choices that we have. It's making us, pushing us to whatever we do at every time. And then what? Layer upon layer, this mind of yours creates choices rich of imagination, deep asleep when awake, wide open. Experiencing whatever it builds, thought by thought. Knowing this, do as you will, knowing well, it's all in the mind. So we are constantly told not to do this, not to do that, to observe so many protocols in life. Much of what we do and what we imagine is all actually figuring constantly. These choices are coming up in our mind. So instead of looking at what society, what the country, what the nation, what the politicians are demanding from you constantly, the idea is to look into your mind and make the choices that your mind makes. And never be ashamed, never be afraid of it. So we need to first, when we define ourselves, by the way our own mind defines ourselves, we don't need anyone else to define us for us or for others. That's where it comes from. And then, flowing from there, I'll tell you what mind really is all about. What is the choice that we say? So it says, the poem is called Mind the Freedom. It plays both ways, mind the freedom, and mind is the freedom. This motiveless mind, the mind doesn't, if you really examine, reflect on your mind, the mind doesn't really have an agenda. It works constantly 24/7 even when you're sleeping. And it has its own motion. So this motiveless mind, moving pure, turns around too soon, too fast, in tinted shades, drawing on past memory. It says that your mind works on the memory that is stored in your brain. So drawing on past memory of what it's seen before, arousing the sleeping cur. It arouses the dog, the beast, the animal in you. Arousing the sleeping cur within that eagerly watches what's this, what's that, what's you, what's me. In arrogant ignorance. Ignorance is actually a weapon. Arrogance is actually a weapon of the of the ignorant person. You'll never see a person who's calm, who's successful as an arrogant being. So if you look at it, when you're confronted with arrogant people, you know that his arrogance comes from his ignorance. It's the ignorance of the mind. So, arousing the sleeping cur within that eagerly watches what's this, what's that, in arrogant ignorance that it knows all, chasing smoky illusion, confused between what is not, and so entertained by its senses, the inner bitch finally rests in the unseen, untouched, unfelt, indivisible whole, its cosmic nature unraveled, liberating it from bondage to the other to set itself free. After your mind has chased you into doing so many things, there comes a time when it actually rests, it goes to sleep. And that is the point. It's not about physical sleeping, but when your mind is at rest, you are no longer in bondage to anybody else, again to define who you are, to shape your destiny.
So to me, poetry is. Yeah, please clap.
Yes, I need claps. I need people to read my poet.
Um, so to me, poetry is almost like standing at the edge of a canyon and, just calling out to see what echo you would get back. And poetry cannot exist in the absence of the reader. So who is your idealized reader?
I've asked this question to myself since I was 9 years old. And I've spent 50 years thinking about it. Who is my reader? I've actually spent 30 years of my life writing for newspapers, reaching out to 10 million people. And I never knew who my reader was. So for a writer, I used to be a journalist, I'm no longer so. When I started for the first 8 years, I used to be a reporter. I never wrote a single report for the reader over there who was reading the newspaper. I was constantly writing for other reporters to prove that I'm better than them. And I did. So they were my readers, not the reader over there. Then when I got to a very senior position, for the next 12 years of my life, I was only writing for my publisher because I needed the best raise in office, I needed the next promotion, I needed to be the editor of the paper that I was working for. But when I happened to become an editor once, and I launched a newspaper with a tie-up with the New York Times, and I ran that paper for 8 years. It was perhaps the best thought of paper in the world because I did it. And that is when I asked myself, who do I write it for? And then I decided I will write that paper only for myself. Because if I was happy with what I was writing, everyone else around me would be happy reading what they were reading. And all my colleagues, I motivated my colleagues from the youngest people to the senior most to actually write for the joy of writing and write for themselves. And I believe it worked. That is what I do now. I write for myself. I enjoy what I write. But when I've completed my writing, I want to share it with the world so that when you read about the mind, you don't interpret it the way I have interpreted it. Yoga Vasishta Ashtavakra that I talked about is interpreted in a very different way in the mats, in the religious temples, in satsangs. And they interpret in terms of what you need to do, what you don't need to do. We have a very long-going dialogue in the country about what's Hinduism, what's Hindutva, what Indians need to do. I approached it from what I need to do. And I found a very different dialogue in the same books which were being used for a very different purpose elsewhere. So I would want you to read these books. I have said that these books are meant for training ourselves into what we need to do. These are actually liberation books. These books, the books that I've written, will help guide us to gain our personal freedom without being bound to anybody else. If you take it seriously, I can guarantee you that freedom on Moksha Ekadashi today.
Right. Yeah, it is a holy occasion, as you pointed out. I didn't remember that. I don't, in our homes, like traditionally, there is something called a panchang or a panjika, where you know the months and the dates according to the Indian calendar. And I just realized that I haven't seen one for the past 20 years.
And you haven't fasted in the morning.
No. Fasting I've never.
Ekadashi is meant for fasting.
I must say that, of course, my size will attest to it. When I was young, I had low blood pressure. I never have fasted in my life. I just refuse to fast. And it's costing me, but okay. I mean, food is to be enjoyed. That's my religion. To come back to, to your assertion about the pandemic and how there have been, I think the pandemic has actually been almost like a magnifying glass. It has magnified so much about ourselves, Even our self-knowledge has got magnified in our own eyes. Um, how do you see poetry being affected by the pandemic and vice versa?
Okay, poetry, I mean, most again, I come from a background where I write on spirituality without being religious. And if you look at it, poetry has been defined by every religion in the world as something that's not done. It's there, I mean, they say Islam says that poetry is to be shunned. Christianity says that. Even Hinduism says that. They say it's the weapon of the demon. It's a weapon of deception. So it's meant to fool people when you write poetry, because you're twisting your tongue and you're twisting your words to write something which is not perhaps real. And it says that the language of the gods are short, straight sentences, direct to the point, what you need to do. Having said that, Quran is a wonderful piece of poetry if you look at it, if you really read it. So is the Gita. And so is the Bible, in the sense that it draws up so many poetic imagery. So when we look at it, there is a contradiction over there. And I start my book also with a disclaimer going to this topic that poetry is a weapon of the demon, it's deception. But having said that, I'll read that poetry out to you in a while. But poetry is the most wonderful expression of human imagination, which takes you into a parallel universe. And that is where we need to deploy them to arouse our senses in a situation where hope is missing. It's an illusion that we create. And that illusion is very much necessary in our world. The real world is not so soft, it's not so kind. Every day we fight our own battles of Kurukshetra with ourselves, with our immediate neighbors. And that is where poetry acts as a healer. This world needs healers. It doesn't need warriors. It doesn't really need surgeons, doctors to cut up your body and tell you what to do. It doesn't need medicine men to give you chemicals to tame your mind. It needs beautiful, calming, soothing words to tell us that we need to have faith in ourselves. And that is where I see poetry coming in and playing its role.
So, another thing that the pandemic has done to us is that it's brought death much closer, And I know that you have a section that deals exclusively with death.
Yes.
Would you like to read something from it, and would you like to talk about your take on death?
Yes, I would. And the reason that I would love to talk about it is tomorrow is going to be the 8th year of my mother's passing away. And the word Ma that we use across India is used as a symbol of veneration. It's across every religion, even Amma for that matter, or Umma or The word mother is common to all languages. It starts with an alphabet actually, which is the seed word, or the alphabet is Ma. From which every mother word emanates. If you study what this stands for, interestingly, the M word or the Ma word is actually the meaning of death. It's the word that is actually defines death. And that's why you have Mara. And from M you have murder. If you go back to the M word, across everywhere, every society, which is something that we don't know, many people don't know. Now, what is death? That is the next question when we talk about death. What does death do to you? Even the Rama story, I don't know, many of us perhaps know that Rama started, Valmiki could not say Rama. So he said Mara, 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 and that became Rama. And both Rama and Mara are actually words which define death. It's not just the killing of Ravana.
This is the Daku Ratnakar story, right?
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. He sits in meditation and he's been asked to talk about how many people he killed, you know. So he keeps saying Mara, 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 and then as he keeps saying that, it turns into Rama in his, in his enunciation. Yes.
So why is Ma associated with death? Because the moment the mother gives birth, and we have these praying mantis. I mean, there are spiders who eat up their children. There are dragons in Indonesia which eat up their kids at birth. But the fact is, when the rishis looked at it, they said the moment the mother gives birth to the child, it becomes the beginning of the end of the child, because the child will die one day. So the mother is actually the mother of death. And then they go on to define, we have all heard about tantric traditions. Mother is also the creator of the mind. So there are three famous words in tantric tradition. They say Matri, Mana, Maya. That is, the mother is the mind of the daughter. Maya is the daughter. And when you reverse it, Maya is also the daughter is the mind of the mother. It works both ways with mind in between. So the mother defines the daughter defines the mother, and they use the mind. So in that context, I'll read out to you. I mean, this is not to scare you. We all love our mothers. We all miss our mothers. And yet, what is the meaning of mother, and why is it very important to us?
You'll have to finish with this.
I'll just finish with this.
I'm so sorry.
Yes.
She signaled me and I didn't understand that it's the end of the session, so we'll just finish
Somebody's
with
waiting?
this poem. Yes.
Okay, so we'll finish with Mother and Mara. O mind, O mother, give birth to feed this body of mine, a lifetime's sorrow. Thus tormented in revenge, I seek to throttle in some slumber every night this mind. Frenemies is friends and enemies. Frenemies us, in pleasure my friend, my enemy in pain, forever at war. This body and mind strengthening each other, wither happiness then, without destruction. The child just dies when the mother is gone. This is something that we need to reflect. When the mother is gone, the child dies. And the child becomes the mother perhaps. But not so when the child leaves first. So the mother and the mind is always there. When your mind is gone, the body is of no use. The body is the child here. The body is of no use. But when the child is gone, the mind's still there. So the mind and the mother hold supreme in both the cases. The child just dies when the mother is gone, but not so when dear child leaves first. O mother, then this mind of mine, be gone, so your child may live another day, another time. Thank you.
I'm so sorry. I did not realize that the time was going by so fast. Beautiful session, lovely poetry. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
You've
I'm
been
sorry
a
for holding
wonderful
you back.
audience.
Bye-bye.